And welcome back, everybody, to another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast. My name is Nathan King. I am joined today by our publisher, Ronnie Sanders, and the second edition of Coach's Corner here with former Auburn defensive coordinator Ellis Johnson. Of course, Auburn heads to Baton Rouge this weekend. They return from their bye week looking to win. It's crazy to think about, guys, but for as little success as Auburn has had there in their history, they could win their second straight game in Tiger Stadium. Of course, both teams are very different than they were back when that happened in 2021. But Ellis, I am interested. How many times, with all over the SEC where you coached, how many times do you reckon you coached in Tiger Stadium?
Gosh, I hadn't thought about it. And in addition to that, I actually took my Citadel team. I think it was my second one. Well, I was there 3 years. We played at LSU. And of course, I was in there a lot with Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State. We did not have a trip over there with South Carolina, but I'd say I've played probably about 8 times, maybe.
Ronnie, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
What do you? What's your advice for Auburn as they go in there for a night game? It's going to be a wild atmosphere, I'm sure.
Gosh, I guess the first thing pops in my mind, and I'm not even an offensive coach by coaching experience, is you better have a system to get your snap and your at-the-line operations that's going to be able to put up with noise. And it's amazing. I keep watching these teams, even these pro teams, and they don't have anything that can handle extremely loud noise. And so you have those 2 or 3 times, possibly a year, or either maybe once or twice every 3 years. But if you can't handle it, I mean, it'll lose a ball game for you. I have not watched Auburn frequently enough to know if they've had any issues with that or not. But, Hugh's been down there many times also. And so he'll be prepared for that, and I'm sure they'll have a plan for it. The other thing that you always have to do, that old saying, try to get the crowd out of it as soon as you can. And very few times have I ever coached down there that we were able to do that. And it was usually either a tight ball game or we had a tough outcome. But you have to try to do something early to take the juice out of that crowd. And everybody's got the famous knowledge about, they hold a certain number of their tickets for their fans that buy them at the gate. And that's always been a tradition there. When they have those night games, the ones that get those tickets have usually been down there drinking at least 24 hours, if not 48. So y'all know it too. I mean, it's one of the hardest places to play, and it seems like it's worse at night.
Well, I remember, when I was there for the year with Coach Saban, our first year down there, I got the best of times and the worst of times. We lost to UAB, if you remember that game. We lost to UAB and turned around the next week, and we beat Tennessee, who I think was ranked in the top 5. And then next week we beat Alabama in Baton Rouge for the first time in, I think it was 40 years. So they went from hating us to loving us in about 3 weeks span. So, but it's, of course, I've been on the other side of that too. At some other places. It's a tough place to play, really tough place to play.
I've had all kinds of experiences. In fact, the year we went down with the Citadel, we had a team who couldn't possibly play with those guys, but they weren't playing real well. And I don't know if it was just kids were overconfident or just weren't into it. But through about a half of the game, it was a decent looking game. I think we were getting beat like 17-0, but it was a decent looking game execution wise. And their fans started booing them. And of course, we had no chance of winning the game. But I remember Nick having to answer lots of questions after the game about why they weren't good at this and why they weren't good at that. And then one year, my first year, I think it was at Mississippi State, we were not a good football team. And it was something, our kids never feared Alabama when we were at State. They never feared Alabama, Auburn, any of those guys. But they always had this mental block, it seemed to me, about LSU. We never played well against those guys. And boy, we got beat so bad, it wasn't even a contest. And I think Nick, with his respect for Sly, actually kind of pulled off a little bit toward the end of the game. And then the terrible game we had the year we went to the national championship there at Auburn, the ugliest game we played that year was down at LSU, and of course got our rear ends kicked. And it kind of was a thing that woke our football team up, and and got us going, to finish out the season the way we did. But boy, it was a terrible experience. We didn't play well, and they were a good football team at the time. I think they ended up winning about 8 that year. And of course, we went to the national championship. But that was the one blemish on our record until the final game, and it was they kicked our rear end.
Yeah, I remember being there in 2017, and we were talking about this before we got rolling, Ronnie. That LSU team had lost to Troy the week before, and not only that, and you're talking about the Boo Birds. I mean, they were down. LSU was down 20-0 in the second quarter, and that place turned from everybody was on LSU, everyone was booing them. Auburn obviously felt like they were going to cruise, and then the fourth quarter when they had that punt return for a touchdown and to take the lead is one of the loudest I've ever heard of a stadium before. And so, it was interesting to me, Ellis, to hear Hugh Freeze on Monday talk about how much he loves the traditions and wants to be out there to see them. I guess how much as coaches sometimes do you maybe wish you had a little bit more time to take those things in? It was kind of refreshing to be like, oh, he's just like the rest of us college football fans, wanting to see everything else that goes on in those great stadiums.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. As a kid, you see it, and then you get a little older and you see it, and then you decide to get into coaching, and then finally you get on that level of coaching, and a lot of those things you're unable to access and do that you always thought were real unique. Now I've been out for about 6 years and have been able to, and I don't want to. But the last thing I want to do is get in traffic with a bunch of drunks and go to a game with 100,000 people, and half of them don't like who I like. But you can't see as well at a game live unless you're up in somebody's box as you can on TV. And then as a coach for 40 years, you're used to watching a game on film, and you're looking at every single thing over and over and over, and you get to where that's what you want to see when you see a football game. You don't want to go out and join the cheerleaders and see how much beer you can drink and everything. You want to watch the game. So, yeah, I've been through the whole gamut from the time that I couldn't wait to be a part of it all the way through the time that you were a part of it. And then now I want to make sure I get the hell away from it for a while. My son walk on at Clemson. Last year, I had taken him to about 4 or 5 ball games, that people would invite him to come to the game. And it was some of the most miserable days of my life. And I kept thinking, I don't understand how these people do it. Kept waiting for the policemen to come escort us in, and they didn't show up for some reason. But it's something now, and I love it, but it's not something I really enjoy getting in the middle of now. Some of those pregame traditions and the tailgating. I do remember that Citadel trip I told y'all about. I've been telling all those folks at Citadel, what a crazy atmosphere it's going to be when we ride in there. Don't be surprised if some things hit the bus or something of that nature. Well, we didn't get the same treatment that we got when we came in with the SEC cap on. So it was kind of quiet and weird. And they all said, well, we didn't get to see any of the stuff you said. Well, I said, well, they really weren't very worried about us. Probably weren't very excited about it. But that is a great atmosphere down there.
One thing LSU and Auburn played some crazy games over the year. I mean, the interception game, I was there for that one. I remember watching the barn catch on fire behind the stadium. There have been all sorts of crazy games down there. I was there. It was the '98 game, I guess, and we ended up losing on the last minute down there. It was '97 or '98, but it's been a lot of crazy games down there.
I didn't know about the barn catching on fire. I remember my very first time I ever went, I was with East Carolina. We were not a good team. We were average. And we had played a tremendously hard schedule. I don't know why this game was moved, but we played them after Thanksgiving. And of course, we were like 4-6 or something like that. And I think they had won about 8 or 9. They were going to a bowl game. But anyhow, we came out of the locker room. It was the first time I'd ever been to Tiger Stadium. I'd heard all the stories and everything. And the Tiger, they used to put him right over there by where the team used to come out from the visitor locker room. And so we go over there to kind of look at it. And of course, they'll prod it or get it to growl if they want him to. And the only thing I remember in my mind when he growled, his breath smelled worse than a pig pen. I mean, it was so bad. I thought, God, that's worse than the intimidation factor. I hope they don't do that when the kids come out. But that was my first trip down there. I had another crazy trip. It was either 98 or 99, Ronnie, and they had one of those typical great running backs they always had. And I'm at Alabama, and we go down there. We had a pretty good team by then. If it was 99, of course, it was the year we wanted the SEC, but I think it was 98. But that running back had about 200 yards at halftime. And we came back out in the second half. We got them stopped, and we scored a bunch of points. I think we did an onside kick. We ended up winning the ball game. They asked me after the game what adjustments we made. I said, we didn't make any adjustments. I said, we just ran him to death the first half, and he was too tired to run the second
half. It's pretty good. Yeah, you were talking about going as a coach, and now as a, with your son. I mean, I've had a little bit of the same experience. It was decades in between being in the stadium and then being on the sideline, then back in the stadium again. And it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment. My kids, I've got my 11-year-old daughter. I think she loves Auburn more than she loves me. She wants to go every weekend. She's and they're all talking about going to the Iron Bowl this year. So it's a different experience seeing it through your kids' eyes.
Absolutely. The other thing about the recruiting trips I took him, they don't give you very good seats, and they got the good seats are the one people pay money for. Mm-hmm. But they did do a little something about parking. You could park in a certain place, and they would shuttle you over to the campus. You go as a player's parent, it's the worst way I've ever been. You don't get anything as far as getting into traffic. You don't get anything as far as a parking place. You get some terrible seats in the stadium. And, after the game, you fight the traffic like everybody else. Mm-hmm. So there's all the things that the NCAA has relaxed on, especially with this NIL stuff. It was seen to me that they would start treating the parents of players better, and of course the players too. But that's been a kind of a eye opener for me. In the last two games, I hadn't even gone to the stadium. I go up there to see him, and then I get somewhere where I can see it on TV, and I go meet him after the game.
Probably the best way to do it.
Yep.
And I probably wouldn't go, but when she wants to go, I try to take her. But
I got a little bit of a story on that. I know y'all can edit this, so I don't mind getting off in the weeds. But when I was at Auburn, one of our closest friends were Tim. Y'all got to help me out. Pitcher.
Tim Hudson.
Tim Hudson. I'm sorry about that. But his wife actually closed our house when we bought it, and then we got to know Tim. He was playing at the time, but it was a year he got stepped on covering first base. He got cleat on the ankle, and he was home halfway through the summer. He ended up coaching. His son and my son were best little buddies. He ended up coaching their football team. We go out there and watch him coach football. But Tim was playing with the Braves at that time, and then our ex neighbor in Hattiesburg was Paul Mahalam, who had pitched at Mississippi State, and he ended up at the Braves. So we had all those connections, and about every other weekend, my wife was taking all the kids, and they were going to see the Braves play, and it was sitting up in these not up in boxes, but in these great box seats, about 20 rows up, right behind the dugout. The kids are out running the bases after the games. I mean, they got it made. And so they probably went to about 6 ball games that year. And then all of a sudden, Tim goes back over to San Francisco to get him a World Series championship. Paul got traded somewhere, but we didn't have any access to the Braves games, and the kids still wanted to go. And I told them, I said, guys, we don't have those tickets anymore, those freebies. And I hope, Ronnie, you're getting some freebies to get your kids there, because when you get those comp tickets for 30 years, and all of a sudden the kids get used to it, and they're sitting in these great seats, and they're coming down there to see the players after the game and all this stuff. And about 5 years later, you're out, and you don't have the comps, and they still want to go to all those games.
Right.
And you're like, well, we're not going to those games anymore. You feel like a cheapskate because you can't buy him 2 tickets to a baseball game, but it's like kills you because you used to get them for free.
I know what you mean. I used to get great tickets for nothing. Now it's you just do the best you can. I think my little one, she just happy to be in the stadium. We were in the upper deck last time, and we went in the Letterman's lounge and was actually looking at Whit, but she just glad to be in the stadium. She just she's happy to hang out. So
yeah, sometimes we forget what an experience that is for them.
My nieces and nephews, or I've got a bunch of nieces and nephews, but the ones who came to a game most recently, they were glad they were up high because they said they wanted to be closer to the Eagle. So the perspective changes a little bit from the mind of a 6-year-old versus people wanting premium seats, and then you ask them and they're like, oh, it's nicer to be closer to the bird that's flying around. But Ellis, I wanted to ask you, in this game in particular, so much of the focus is going to be on LSU has an absolutely dynamic quarterback in Jaden Daniels. I guess from a defensive coordinator's perspective, stopping a dual threat quarterback always just seems like such a challenge. Not that a pocket passer, a guy who sticks in there, isn't a challenge, but throughout your career, when you were presented with somebody who not even just taking off, but just extending the play, just keeping the DBs on, down the field, waiting for guys to get open. What is the biggest challenge with that? And I guess, throughout your career, what did you find were some of the best methods to contain somebody like that and keep somebody like that from extending, play after play in the passing game?
Well, when they can do both and they've got good targets and they've got a decent running game, which they're good. They're not great, but they're good in the running game. It obviously makes it harder. I mean, your question is probably the biggest question going into the game for Auburn is how we're going to, minimize this guy's damage. You have to have things merged together. In other words, we used to have code calls. If I was going to run a certain type of coverage where I knew we had a lot of man coverage, there'd be no eyes on the quarterback, then we put a little code call in there that Brad, the defensive line coach, would send it out there. And those kids had to understand this is not the time for you to take a shot. Just we'd have rush lanes, and we'd try to get them to overemphasize the discipline on it, to squeeze the guy instead of trying to run in there and sack him every time. And we had some guys that could do that. Then, if you're going to play some zone, that's when, you could twist, do some things with your linemen, maybe turn them loose because you had eyes on the quarterback. The problem is you still, athletically, he can still get away from you. And they're a really strange team this year. I'm sure y'all have looked at all those. They're next to last in scoring defense in the SEC right now. And they're ahead of Vanderbilt. But I go back and just the question you just asked. They got the best quarterback in the SEC this year. At least I think they do. And statistically, may not be, but to me, he is the best quarterback in the SEC. And that's obviously how they're hanging around up there with a chance to come in the back door. If they can win out, they could still beat Alabama and go to the West. But that's going to be the challenge. And Auburn's been playing some good defense. And this game is not going to surprise me at all if it's an upset. LSU is giving up too many yards in throwing game, particularly, to be a really championship team. And so that's got to get better. Or, Daniels is not going to be able to carry him over a good, solid team that can play with him. But I think that's the biggest thing. And I'm sure they'll have a plan to try to minimize him pulling it down or buying time. But that's easier said than done.
Ronnie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. What do you think about Pete Jenkins going back down there? They hired him as an analyst last week. I was texting with him during the week, and I think he was less than impressed with the defensive effort thus far.
Well, you look at it statistically, they're awful. Yeah. As much as I've seen, it looks like to me that 75% of it's back in the secondary. And I don't know whether it's, some talent gaps or if they're doing things and putting those kids on an island too much. The first time it showed up was against Florida State in the very first ball game. and they had two big, tall wideouts they could run. And they just, several times, as y'all saw, as the game went on, they couldn't match up with those guys, and they exploited it. Clemson got a bit of it too a couple of weeks ago. They did a better job. They did a much better job of it than LSU, but I think they're a heck of a lot better up front, and they were able to get better pressure on the kid. But as the game wore on, the deep balls and the downfield throws to those receivers is what beat Clemson on defense. So I don't know whether Pete knows a lot about coverage or not, but I know he's a heck of a football coach, and he's coordinated before. He's always coached up front. He's coordinated before, and I think he can certainly be an extra pair of eyes. See if there's some things that you're doing well or not doing well. I think some of these older coaches that are experienced to bring them in as analysts and consultants and stuff, I think it's a good idea. I've never been a fan of it in the middle of the stream, middle of the season, or something's going wrong, something's going right. I think number one, depending on what you let him do and how much he's in that building, I think you send a message to your players that there's a problem, and I think you better be careful, or you can lose them. The guy who's ever in charge of it is in charge of it, and if you ever get his credibility damaged with the players, you got a problem. So, how they handled that, I think, is important. I didn't know he was going back down, but I'm a huge fan and got a lot of respect for Pete. Known him over the years. I think he's one of the best coaches been in the business. But I don't think bringing people in during the season, having them talk to the team, or having them, get up there and critique things that those kids have done, trying to help, I don't think that helps. I think that can be more harm than help.
No,
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that's the way they're going to do it. I'm just saying if he comes in and he's spending time with that staff, I think that's probably a helpful thing. If he comes in and he's allowed to do anything with the team, I think that's a mistake.
Well, I'm not sure what all he's doing. I know that my guess is that he's been around the program. He's got a house in Baton Rouge, or used to, and then he's got one in the Panhandle too, right there on the Intercoastal. So I think he's over there a lot. I'm not sure exactly how much, but I'm not sure what all he's doing. But I think he's a legend down there. I mean, I'm sure he's around a lot.
Yeah. And again, I've got tremendous respect for him. But if you and I know it, then everybody on social media and then the media knows it.
That's right.
And if you get that media talking about it down there, pretty soon the players are going to know it if they don't already know it. And again, I don't understand if this is a way for Kelly to make sure that somebody thinks he knows he's got a problem and he's trying to fix it. But if you don't have to announce it. If you want to bring him in there, you bring him in there and have all kinds of things he could help on. But to say that we've taken this big step, we're going to bring in somebody who can fix it. Why didn't you bring him in there 10 weeks ago?
Well, it's tough living down there. I mean, I know you've lived in a lot of different SEC markets, and in addition to Clemson and some other places, but the media down there really beats you up. It was brutal at least in the places where I worked. But I think LSU might have been. Of course, you had Feinbaum when I was at Auburn, but at LSU, it was. Everything got so negative so quickly. If you lost a game, it was immediately, the end of the world. Talk about that.
Yeah, I did. Obviously, I never had been down there, so I didn't know it was that particular bad. But I do know that they're rabid fan base, and sometimes the media they respond to the fans as much as the fans respond to the media. And if the media knows they can light a fuse on those fans, I mean that's their job. I have had guys that worked there told me they didn't like living there, and it was everything from it's hard to find a place where you got good schools, it's close enough to the place, to the campus and all that, or their kids were always catching hell at school about what was happening on the football field. But that's one place I've had guys work that they didn't always enjoy the experience. So, and I'm sure the media might have been a big part of it. It is everywhere has a unique, unique atmospheres. And I have heard, the media can be tough down there. Obviously, in places like Alabama, when you get to that level, you got guys in that media market that can get pretty sharp too. But a lot of times they come up and they're a little bit more part of the program than just the media. I'm sure that they've been catching their share of negativity right now, but that goes on everywhere. You just got to try to keep it out of your players.
I guess that's what I was going to ask. How does that affect your players? I mean, you've been some big time places. I mean, how do you keep, as Ron Zook used to say at Florida, how do you keep the noise out of the system and keep the players from?
Yeah, used to be a lot easier, and y'all were in this business, so I mean, obviously, it's harder now.
Mm-hmm.
But you have these things. You have podcasts. You have social media. You have all sorts of things. It is impossible to isolate them or insulate them. Now, you used to could do that maybe 30 years ago. You could insulate them a little bit, but you can't now. I mean, one of the easiest places I ever worked from the media standpoint was Mississippi State. We'd come off the practice field on Mondays, and it didn't matter if we just upset Alabama or if we just lost by 30 to Ole Miss. There wasn't going to be but one beat writer standing there, maybe two, and they were all trying to get a job somewhere in the NFL or go somewhere out Midwest to get a job. So, it was easy, but that didn't make it that much better, and it was still hard with the kids. But you have to stop some of the things. It used to be that the media would be calling them in their dorm rooms and contacting them, and I think some of that's gotten better. But the social media and of course the electronic media, even the local newspapers online. So there's no way you can protect them from all that stuff. You just have to make sure your locker room's good. You don't have players against players. You got coaches, in tune with the players. And if you try to insulate them from it, it's going to backfire on you because you're not going to know that they're still getting it. And then they're going to be having problems with it. And you don't even know it. It's something you just have to stay with all the time and make sure they listen to you more than they listen to that.
And I know this is off LSU, but what's the difference? I was going to ask you this last time we were on. What's the difference in working at Alabama and working at Auburn? You've had some great experiences in both places. What are the differences? I know there are differences, but
well, that's a good question. It would seem like to you maybe it might be an obvious answer or two, but to me they're very similar. And the media to me in both places was pretty scrutinizing, if you would. They were present. They were very well handled by the people at the two universities respectively, keeping them from being a nuisance, but also having really good access. When I was at Alabama, I was a younger coach. And the first time I was there, I wasn't a coordinator. I didn't have to have a whole lot to do with the media. And by the time I got back, I'd been a coordinator at Clemson and a little older and experienced it a little bit better. And then we had some bad seasons those 4 years with the things we inherited. But and then, of course, the way it fell apart. So there was some pretty hairy times. But I never dealt with anybody there that was trying to knife you in the back or do something controversial. They just wanted facts and they wanted answers. I never did bother me. Same thing with Auburn. I was there as an older coach and had plenty of experience with media. I think maybe they can sense that when you deal with them. If you're trying to hide from them or spin something on them, they know that. So the point is just, you gotta be honest and you gotta be upfront. First year it wasn't that hard. Second year it got a little harder. But hell, that's the way it should have been. We were playing good one year and we weren't playing that good the next year. And we weren't playing all that great even the first year. We didn't have that kind of talent. But I think they just want the truth. And I think you give them that. Most of them are good people, decent people. They want a story and they want facts that would matter to their story. And they don't want you trying to spin something, trying to paint it like, it is what it is.
Well, I got two more questions before we let you go. Talk about LSU's defensive weaknesses and then give me a prediction.
I'd say, as I mentioned earlier, in watching them parts of about 4 games, and I watched a lot of the Florida State game, the opening game, they're having some issues in the secondary. And again, I don't know if it's what they're playing or who's playing, But this is something that Auburn's not been able to exploit real well because they don't have the kind of quarterbacks right now. I'm sure he'll get that addressed in the off season, but right now you got to do what you can do. They're not particularly good throwing the football, but they've been managing to move the ball pretty well at times. They're sitting there. They're not ranked very good in total offense, but they're not that far behind, say, Alabama. And the difference in the yardage and so forth. They just got to finish and get some points. On the other hand, Auburn's been kind of balanced. They're playing decent on both sides of the ball. If you had a really good quarterback, and the kids are doing the best they can with what they've got, they're playing to their abilities. But Peyton's he's kind of a dual threat guy, but the first threat with throwing the ball is not there. It's not on the level. But I think as bad as LSU is on defense, and some of it could be the schedule, as bad as they've played on defense, Auburn's got an excellent chance to go down and win the football game. I think they've got to have a game like they had against Georgia. They're going to have to keep it close. They're going to have to move the football. They're going to have to flip the field with field position and so forth. And they've got a chance to go down there and win. But if they get behind and they have to put the ball in the quarterback's hands and make too many throws in critical situations, it's going to get away from them. If I had to predict, I'd say LSU probably a touchdown better because they played on their home field. But I don't think there's enough difference in these two teams that an upset's not possible.
I tend to agree with you. Well, Coach, we appreciate you being with us this week.